Welcome back. For this video, we're going to look at communication and the importance of communication. As we mentioned in previous videos, the world of computer science and engineering has changed. We are working in groups. We rely on a large population of people, whether it's the people who come tells us what the customer needs are, talking to the customers, talking to suppliers, the service providers, the support, the other engineers of different discipline or our same discipline. Anyway, in the end of the day, we have to talk and communicate with a large group of people in order to be successful. And we have to be conscious of the fact that just because we are saying something and we think we are saying something, the other people are actually hearing what it is that are and understanding the way we intend them to understand. And the challenge comes from the fact that you are talking, you are the sender of information. You have your own filter, you have your own biases, you have your own history, and you have your own hopes and dreams and values and all those kind of good stuff. So when you speak through that lens. Okay, you think you may be saying something, but you're saying it through that lens. And then the problem now is compounded because the person who's listening to the receiver of this message also has all of those baggages, so his filters. So it's what you think you said may not be what they heard because it went through two translations, one your translation, the other one was their translation, even though everybody's speaking in the same language. So that's why communication becomes a challenge. We're going to use, to start with, we're going to use the brain model we talked about earlier, the Herman brain dominance model or the whole brain model, to talk about kind of even if people are in different thinking modes, they have different dominant thinking modes, how communication has to be adjusted to make sure they receive the message that you are trying to communicate. For example, if you're talking to someone who's analyzer, the highlight is that they need fact and logic. If you want to make sure they understand and they internalize what you've told them, you got to make sure whatever you're trying to sell them has got facts and data to support it. Okay, if it's not supported by logic, fact, and data, they may ignore you, they might not hear you, they might understand it totally different. So if you're talking to someone that you know is an analyzer, you need to kind of adjust your communication, make sure your background is such that they receive it to them. If you're talking to, let's say, someone who's dominantly a manager thinking mode, then you need to make sure that they understand your plan is predictable, it's low risk, otherwise they're not going to be receptive to what it is that you are saying, because these are the folks who don't like risk. They want things to be well thought of. If they feel like you don't have a plan or you're trying to shoot from the hips, they're just gonna blow you off, basically. And then the next one is the visionaries. These are the folks, so here you need to make sure that they see that whatever you're talking about is interesting, is new, is changing, because if it's not, they're gonna check out, basically. They're not gonna be listening to you. So they're gonna make sure your plan is new, exciting, let them know they're not gonna be doing the same. This is not the same old they've heard all in the past. It's something new that you're trying to communicate. And then the partners, of course, they need relationship and emotional appeal. Remember, they want to make sure people are taken care of, people have good relationships. So, for example, if you use anecdotal examples of people benefiting or whatever, however affected people, if you use that, for example, for an analyzer, you've wasted your breath. They're just going to say, that's just an anecdotal. I need data. I need to know how it all works. But for a partner, if you don't have those examples, somebody who's dominant thinking is the partner type, you need to be able to appeal to their emotion, the emotional, and the fact that this improved relationship and things like that. If you want to be able to reach them to so they can hear you. These are kind of different modes. Now, we know that people are not strictly analyzer and manager, but most of us have a tendency to be one or the other of these things, dominant most of the time, or dominant in a dominant mode of one of those fields. So it's important when you talk to somebody to make sure they you're aware of where they're coming from. Now, communication is not just one thing. Communication has many different modes. Like a lot of the time, we are doing one-on-one communication. Most of those kind of form into it's not strictly a negotiation, but they do have a form of negotiation, because if you're talking to somebody, you're either trying to tell them something, convince them of something, or change their mind, or just, it's pretty rare that we talk with no objective. There's something going on. So that's most of our one-on-one communication end up in the form of negotiation, or it doesn't have to be heavy-duty negotiation. Deciding where to go to lunch is a form of negotiation. We sometimes have to do group presentations, stand up in front of groups of 20, 30, 40, 50, hundreds, thousands, and have a conversation. Most of us will probably not get to the 1,000, but most of us will end up having to present to 20 to 40 people, more often than we like in our life for most of us. Sometimes we have to communicate with the written report. So there are all kinds of stuff. And of course, general social business, those kind of have different requirements. So we're gonna focus to just talk about the top three: the negotiation, the group presentation, and the written report, just to give a sense of some highlights, as people have done a fair amount of studies in these fields of what is effective, what's not effective. Negotiation, there are many ways of classifying negotiation, but typically there are three forms of negotiation. We call it soft, hard, and principal or interest-based or win-win. That's typically ideal. If you get there, that's wonderful. Soft negotiation is if both of us, one side has a huge amount of power over another, or for example, somebody's supervisor tells them to do something and their job depends on it. There's an imbalance of power, so whatever the supervisor tells us, the person who's working is going to do within limits. So that's called a soft negotiation, because there's a difference of power between the two groups, and one person does not argue with the other, whatever that person with high power wants. The person who lacks perceived or real lack of power will go ahead and do. Hard negotiation, on the other hand, is where both people either perceive or have equal power, and neither one will give in. So that those negotiation usually leads to conflict and could be counterproductive. But one nice thing about it is it exposes any area of conflict. If there is any issues, it come to the surface, because neither party is feeling like they have to kind of follow whatever the other person wants. Everybody brings up what it is that they want out of the deal. So one good thing is everything comes to the open, so it may end up clearing the air and be a better solution. The last one is really kind of the best one if you can get there. Unfortunately, in order to do a principled negotiation, both parties have to have a certain amount of trust between them. And so what happens is that they work together trying to figure out a better solution than what they came to the table. Okay, so for example, if it's a soft negotiation, let's say somebody wants to take a day as an employee and wants to take a day off, and the boss says, no, you can't take a day off. And a soft negotiation, that's the end of the conversation. What happens is that the employee is unhappy. The manager may not get the worker that day that he wants, because they might be concerned about whatever they wanted to do on that day. So that would be a kind of less than ideal for both sides if they do a soft negotiation. On the other hand, if the employee feels like he can go next door and find a job, but tell him to buzz off, and then there's a conflict. Either he's going to leave the job, which is not good for the manager, or some other thing, or they get into a back and forth, both end up unhappy. So that would be the hard negotiation. The principal negotiation would be they get together and try to say, okay, so actually, so the story may go, the employee comes in and says, I want a Thursday off, but then after they sit down and spend some time talking about it, it says he only needs the morning to go take care of, go to a doctor's appointment or whatever. So then all of a sudden the manager said, oh, I think so-and-so is able to cover your morning shift, And this way they come up with a solution that satisfied both folks, but they had to get together and get into the root cause of what was needed to happen in order for them to do negotiation, to get into a principled result, which is good for both of them. And in order for that to happen, both parties have to be in a position that they can trust each other, bring out basically what's bothering them, and work together to come up with the best solution. Another form of communication is called group presentation, where you're standing in front of a group or somehow through Zoom or whatever, you're communicating with folks. And most of us will have to do that sooner or later in our careers, usually sooner than later. And so the key things to remember here, this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but some of the things, always make sure you know what your audience is looking for, what they're interested in, what their issue is. Be open to that and make sure you create your presentation with the audience in mind. Make sure when you're trying to present, you kind of command a certain amount of authority, if you will, by the way you conduct yourself. Make sure you introduce yourself clearly, make sure you state the purpose of your presentation, acknowledge what you think the audience is expecting to hear. When you present, kind of, stand erect, make eye contact, speak clearly and calmly, don't be in a hurry, project energy and enthusiasm, and try to use multiple devices to reinforce your point, rather than just talk, and maybe use some slides or some props of some sort so you can support your presentation. And try to limit the things you want the audience to take away to no more than 3 to 5 items. Most humans can't remember more than a few items at a time. So if you try to put too many things in your presentation, they may not take anything away. Okay. And of course, be aware of the audience dominant thinking mode. So you make sure if you're talking to a bunch of analytical people, you bring a lot of data. If you're talking to somebody who is visionary, make sure you present how new and exciting this field is, whatever you're talking about, and how this and that, this new thing hasn't been done before, their challenges and things like that in your presentation. Okay. Some of the kind of remembering that your audience is busy, keep you to your timeline. If you told them you're going to present in 30 minutes, keep yourself in 30 minutes, practice your presentation before you do it. And then, so manage the question. If somebody goes off topic, bring them back to the main topic. And make sure you allow a little bit of time at the end in case you do summarize it. Typically, they say it's really a good idea to tell people at the beginning of your presentation what you're going to say, and at the end of your presentation, come back and check and say, this is what I said. This is going to reinforce your viewpoints that you wanted to take away. So that's large communication. It was kind of a quick review of it. There are courses on how to do communication. As a matter of fact, Clark has multiple communication classes, and if you have an opportunity, those are probably worthwhile to take. We have small group, large group presentations, and things like that. Written technical report, I think it's the importance is to be clear, to be concise. If for example, if you're writing a document and a table can describe your data, don't write 5 paragraphs to describe something that you can show in a table. So just make sure your presentation of your information is the best way you can do. Try it. If you're writing a technical paper, it's important to make sure, for example, your paper has a cover sheet, a title, authors, a little brief summary of what it is that is in your paper, in case somebody doesn't want to read it or wants to decide whether to read it or not. They have like a 1-2 paragraph summary of it. Make sure that whatever topic you're talking about, the problem you're trying to discuss in your paper is technical paper is very clear at the very front. And make sure you have a research section that supports your analysis, that is used in analysis, so the person knows where you got your data, that you did the analysis. Make sure you have a section that concludes everything and recommends what you think is the best solution for that. And then if there are any issues, dependencies that you did not resolve in your report, make sure you have a section at the end that does that. So these, if you do these, then you have a complete more or less complete report, and a person can kind of follow it if you have it in order, and these items are there. So as kind of a review back, we started by saying communication is going to be required everywhere you go. And then we said there are different kinds of communication that we engage in. So each one will require a different one. For example, the three we spent time talking about was negotiation, group reports, and written reports. Okay. So when you so some of the ways of kind of testing to see whether you kind of got a grasp of what we're talking about. There are some questions at the end of this chapter. We'll ask questions such as, when presenting to an analyzer, what should you emphasize? Of course, analyzers are the people who want fact and data and logic and all that. So you got to make sure those things come through in your communication. When presenting to visionary, what you do, hey, these are the stuff that is new, innovative, never been done before. You're breaking new grounds to make sure that they are engaged. Because if you say you're doing the same thing that we've done in the past with some slight modification, they might kind of get bored. Or if you use a lot of data, they might get bored and check out. The three types of negotiation, we talked about that: hard, soft, and the principled one. And then you might want to think about an experience you've had, explain the situation for negotiation, and see kind of what method you think you used when you were working on that negotiation. Take a look at the group presentation, see if you can recall what were some of the key things to remember to do when you're doing a group presentation. Here, ask for the top 5. Pick up 5 things that you should be doing when you're presenting to a group. And then a couple of retrospective things for you to think about. One is just why, see if you can verbalize why you think communication teamworks are important to engineers today. We talked about that before. And the last one is, what are the most important section of a written technical report which we just went through just a few minutes ago. Anyhow, that brings us to the end of this video, and see you later.